Hey everybody, it's Andre Bagansky coming to you from Decrypt with an interview today with Kyle Klemmer, Blockstreet co-founder, here to talk today about WFLI and USD1. How are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you join the show. I know that WFLI is supposed to begin trading on Monday, on Memorial Day. And while we're not necessarily here to talk about that, it does sort of dovetail into this whole Trump crypto foray that we're seeing under the current administration. One of the things that Blockstreet is doing right now is helping promote the use of USD1 within the crypto sphere. But before we really dive into that, could you just help me draw a clear connection between Blockstreet and how it became involved in WFLI?
The biggest thing with Blockstreet is creating, the most complementary ecosystem we can to the vision that they have, for, one, like spreading USD1 adoption, but as well as, helping bank the unbanked, and increase adoption that way. So my partner, Matt Morgan, he is an advisor to World Liberty. So he helps out with the partnerships and marketing. And then most recently, he was named Chief Investment Officer of Alt5 Sigma, which is the public company that did the Treasury deal for World Liberty Financial tokens.
I was going to ask, can you help me draw the connection in terms of how you guys became involved in WFLI?
So Matt has been friends with the co-founders for years. And so when the project came up, they presented him with the opportunity. They know he has a background in the blockchain space. And he's been a part of it really since the beginning, trying to provide value in any way, shape, or form to what they're trying to accomplish. And so when we set out to create Blockstreet, it was really just an ecosystem to help further USD1 adoption. So it's the fastest growing stablecoin of all time. It's the most compliant stablecoin, and we see it surpassing Tether. And so with that, we want to do everything that we can. There's a lot of people all around the world who are incredibly complimentary of, what the current administration is doing. They're very excited about what World Liberty Financial is trying to accomplish with USD1. And a lot of people, the first thing that they say is, how can we help? And, Blockstreet wants to give people an opportunity to be able to build and grow in the USD1 ecosystem. And so there's a lot of really amazing projects that are already helping support that. And Blockstreet, we aim to be one of those as well.
You talk about a USD1 ecosystem. What does that look like today?
So I mean, that's currently evolving right now. So, currently USD1 is live on TRX, Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum. They recently just made an announcement of having minted $30 million worth of USD1 on Solana. So the ecosystem is growing. We're still waiting on kind of a clear game plan as to what the USD1 rollout looks like. But I do know that they have some very lofty goals of what they're trying to accomplish.
I would love a lofty prediction from you at this moment. I wanted to ask you about what you think the market cap of USD1 is going to look like at the end of this year, and then let's say 2028.
I mean, the goal is to continue the trajectory of it being the fastest growing stablecoin in the entire world. So I think, ultimately first things first is, USDC is the first target, but ultimately making it the most widely adopted stablecoin in the entire world. So, I definitely fall into the camp of people who feel that, with the team, the backing, and just the overall excitement that the blockchain community has, I can certainly see USD1 being the most widely adopted stablecoin in the world by 2028.
Before we get too far in this conversation, I'd love to just get like a real basic explanation of how USD1 makes money.
That part, I, would going to yield to the team as to, that obviously with a lot of stable coins, it's the trading fees that get made. They get certain percentage points, but there's going to be certain things that I don't think are publicly disclosed yet. So wait for those things to come to light before we speak further on that.
Sure. I just thought the basic premise of, the token is backed by cash and US treasuries is usually how most coins are going under the Genius Act in terms of their overall business model. The only reason why I ask that is just because readers might not be so familiar with that. I guess you are seeing states like Wyoming push forward with similar initiatives. They've got the Frontier token, where revenue generated from the token's reserves will be swept into the school fund. But, along those lines, I just think, in terms of your position as really a visionary for USD1, what are some of the more lucrative ways that you think USD1 can be integrated into the sort of crypto ecosystem, if you will, beyond a trading pair on an exchange?
Well, I mean, one of the unique things that the team has disclosed is the point system. So it's going to be it's going to have its own points, I think like a rewards type thing. So I think we're still waiting on, I'd say, an official explanation as to what that looks like, but you're starting to see a lot of USD1 partners. So exchanges, different applications. And what you can gather from that is just certain incentivizations for people to be able to participate and be active participants and active users of USD1. So I'm sure once the WFI token is freely trading and the ecosystem starts to expand a little bit more, there's going to be a lot of I would say very exciting announcements as to what that's going to look like.
I guess very broadly then, like, what do you think is ultimately like what dictates a stablecoin's success in the market and its ability to grow market cap, if that's a sort of uniform goal for most stablecoin?
Ease of use. I would say ease of use and its adoption on a retail sector. We're moving into a day and age, especially in terms of, one, we're starting to see positive legislation and regulation. But now in terms of just the ease of use as far as technology goes, you're able to see stablecoins be able to be transacted at point of sale using things like Apple Pay, on-ramping and off-ramping of fiat. And so, a stablecoin that is able to be easily understood and adopted by the retail consumer, I think that's ultimately what's going to be, what dictates a winner, is that once they start using that, maybe over fiat currency, holding cash, to me, I think the stable coin that becomes, as easily transferred as someone, giving a dollar bill from one person to another is going to be the one that ultimately wins.
Yeah, I think that's pretty along the lines of what most people would say is like the biggest thing holding stablecoins back is like this idea of sort of, can I use it to purchase a cup of coffee? Like, what does that actual sort of infrastructure behind that look like? The website for USD1 sort of lists infinite, or Blockstreet's website, I should say, lists infinite opportunities for USD1. Like, when you think about infinite opportunities for USD1, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think USD1 is representative of, to me, it's more of a movement than anything. Is from the very beginning, when you see what the team at World Liberty Financial set out, and especially this administration, is to really kind of rid ourselves of, for the longest time, for those of us who have been in blockchain for quite some time, is that there's been very adversarial relationship between government and blockchain. And so to me, USD1 represents kind of a changing of the guard. They are, you have, USDC, which, most of the fees go back to Coinbase. You have USDT, which in some ways is a black box. And so now you have this stable coin that is built in the image of the Genius Act. It's compliant. It's, as just given the affiliations, it's probably held to a higher standard than just about any other currency in the world. And, but along the way is, I think USD1 means a lot more to people than just being a stable coin, is that people understand the vision, what it's trying to accomplish. It stands for something. It stands for a change. And I think, ultimately it's very representative of a changing of a stance from an adversarial relationship to one that's more favorable to people in blockchain. A lot of people that use stable coins are people who have been disenfranchised by banks, have been in some way or shape or form, had trouble moving payments across borders and just the overall utilization. And so to them, being able to align with a stable coin like USD1 means something in ways that it doesn't mean with other stable coins.
I see what you're saying. When it comes to USD1, I think you, in a position who's trying to sort of grow its use, I think you would be able to speak to this. Would you say that exchange listings, sort of getting USD1 integrated into crypto exchanges, versus sort of growing USD1's use in everyday payments? Like, if you had to pick one route to go, which one do you think has most upside?
It's quite the catch-22, right? And I think ultimately, being able to solve the use in everyday use is I would say right now, the more clear and pressing thing. I think through osmosis, the exchanges are going to pick it up. But given the favorable legislation that is, coming in with the Genius Act, you see MiCA compliance in Europe and other parts of the world are starting to follow suit. But I think at the same time, kind of pointing back to what I was mentioning before in terms of people just kind of identifying USD1 is, I have to imagine there's a very large appetite of countries, sovereign wealth funds, other larger bodies that see the opportunities that are presented with USD1 and relate to that. And so I think more so than anything, USD1 stands to have the greatest ability to have a market penetration with the people because they understand what it stands for. And I think, that's really made clear and apparent. It's the fastest growing stablecoin to date. And I think it will continue to be the fastest climbing stablecoin of all time until it surpasses, Tether and takes its place. Obviously I'm biased, but I truly believe in what they're trying to accomplish. And so I think, I think both problems are good problems to have. I think that crypto is largely rallying behind it. And I think that, even though exchanges and things are picking it up, the community that supports, the vision that is being cast is that they're made even more excited that you finally have this large body that is getting penetration with, say, the powers that be in terms of retail adoption, and they know that ultimately, through essentially osmosis, that's going to have positive effects on them.
I think you may have mentioned right there sovereign wealth funds as being one potential sort of buyer of USD1. Can you help me understand why a sovereign wealth fund would want to own the USD1 over a different stablecoin? Or what opportunities, I think is what you said there. You said opportunities.
I would say more so just as far as like investment vehicles. They recognize an opportunity of just an up and coming stable coin. Tether being where it's at, it's very high market cap, USDC, giving away a lot of its fees. Just like any sort of investment vehicle, that's what sovereign wealth funds are, right? They identify, great assets to be able to do that. And so just see the type of rise that USD1 currently has in the overall market fervor. I think one would reasonably assume that this is just a very good to look at.
I think that tracks. One of the things, shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to get your thoughts on crypto treasury firms real quickly. I know we've seen a bunch of crypto treasury firms sort of debut this year. Do you think the moment of peak hype has passed us?
Actually, I don't even think we've scratched the surface. And the reason, for that is, when you look at it from a marketing perspective is that your lowest converting audience is always the early adopter, right? 1 to 3%. It's a small amount, but when you look at it, we're looking at it through the lens of the U.S. public markets. U.S. public markets, depending on the day, could be in upwards of $80 trillion. There's a lot of free flowing capital that has yet to experience that of crypto. We're over $100 trillion when you factor in all of the global public markets. And so what you're starting to see is, I think you're starting to see the early phases of interest. The whole reason as to how these things even came to be is the fact that, we're starting to see favorable legislation, less adversarial legislation against crypto companies, which means that now for the first time, we understand what the guardrails look like. We understand kind of what the rules of the road look like in terms of the public markets being able to participate in crypto. I don't even think the public markets have fully digested the technology that exists within our space. And, so the Treasury plays, I think, are the first to go around with that. I think once the public markets start to understand what the crypto market cycles look like, and honestly, I think the market cycles are going to be less volatile than they have been just because of this participation. But it signals a changing of the guard. I think that when you look at value that these digital asset treasuries, these strategic reserves in public companies represent for crypto companies, because now for the first time is that a crypto company is able to build a treasury without having to liquidate their tokens. And I think that part is really interesting, is because now you're able to take a certain allocation of the token. It essentially becomes held and converted into stock in a publicly traded company. And now that money is able to be reinvested into the ecosystem. And as the public markets start to learn and understand about the different technologies that are being built within these ecosystems, which is truly groundbreaking, we're going to see an interesting dynamic develop. So what does that look like in 5 years? I don't think, either one of us know, but to me, I think that this is a very good first step. Once the public markets fully digest and understand and even start to join in the creation of this, you're seeing the largest funds in the entire world, the BlackRocks, the JP Morgans, are already starting to build their own ecosystems as well. I think we've only scratched the surface.
Can you talk to me a little bit about whether all cryptocurrencies are well suited for a treasury strategy and how an asset's tokenomics factor into that?
Yeah, this is something that I've had a lot of recent discussions with. I don't believe all of them are. And I think one of the interesting things is it's similar to you see this creation of a lot of different L1s, L2s. I think even in the crypto market, we're not even certain as to whether all of these things should exist, right? I think that we could have a lot of conversations as should we have as many L1s? Should we have as many L2s? Now we're getting into layer 0 and different protocols like that. I think ultimately it comes down to value creation and which of these blockchains actually have tangible value creation. People can look at a blockchain like TRX and say what they want about Justin Sun, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of retail adoption around TRX. Tangible use, countries, people live day by day using a blockchain like TRX. So something like that could positively benefit. And so I think, just like any sort of capital market, we're going to see, which one of these tokens is going to be able to create value. And in that, depending on the deal structure of these companies, are they able to return value to their shareholders? And so that's why I was saying is I think early on, we're kind of in that first step. You haven't seen a lot of these companies hold multiple different assets. You haven't seen them participate beyond maybe a validator or something, just general small yield bearing asset. And so I think there's going to be a certain capitulation with that. I think already right now you're starting to see kind of Ethereum become the darling of this cycle, kind of in ways that other people probably didn't even anticipate. And it's a lot of it has to do with, Ethereum has withstood the test of time. It's trusted amongst many. It has been around for the last 11 years. And I think as time goes on and some of these other, blockchains have an ability, like I said, to create a certain level of value and gain a certain level of adoption, you'll see them kind of assert themselves in public markets as well. But I think really only time will tell.
Well, I think you could definitely fairly say that the corporate buying that we've seen from Ethereum treasury companies is playing a role in the asset price sort of going up. But I wonder, when we think about different cryptocurrencies, I think a Bitcoin maxi might turn around and say an Ethereum treasury company is ridiculous because Ethereum's supply is theoretically infinite, right? Like its supply can only grow by a certain amount each year, less than 2%. But at the same time, it could be sort of theoretically unlimited while only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. Now you're seeing like crypto treasury firms come up to sort of whether it's NFTs or even meme coins along those lines that are sort of created with that set sort of a circulating supply. Like, what are your thoughts on that compared to sort of like maybe say Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Again, I think it has to go to like when you're saying like expanding outside of just Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's market exploration. This is the very first time that I think crypto has been kind of evaluated at a different level at scale. Despite what people like myself who spend 24 hours a day every waking moment inside of crypto might think is that we're still a relatively small niche. And, I think right now what you're starting to see is that people are evaluating the market for the different potential avenues of value creation. Is that, assets like Bitcoin, I think, we anticipate, I'm in the camp of, we're going to see $1 million Bitcoin. We're going to see $10 million Bitcoin. With Ethereum, despite, what you're saying, the supply constraints, I think the value creation, kind of negates that. In the same way that you can print new shares in a stock for different initiatives, there's going to be, certain arguments that can be made, But in terms of meme coins, I think one of the interesting things about meme coins is that how do you put a price on narrative, on culture? I think we've seen certain instances in the past of things like GME and AMC. When you get people to rally behind a certain cause against, say a common enemy, that can change the trajectory of a stock forever. I think GameStop looks much different today than it does, several years ago. And so, with that in mind, who knows? These guys are trying to identify where that next area of value creation is. You look at, say, like the CryptoPunks, for example. There's 10,000 CryptoPunks. Will never be more than 10,000 CryptoPunks. And, that is high value digital art, non-fungible on chain. And so once I think the public starts to understand the technology and kind of how people already within these communities value it, and then kind of assess that as to whether or not that scales. Like I said, I think it's the future is fun and exciting in terms of where things go in terms of these companies.
Sure. I mean, I really do think your sort of perspective there on GME is really interesting, and sort of this idea where it's like these narratives that people sort of like they sort of assign to themselves are the real driver of price in a lot of those cases. I mean, like I think that like is just I mean, crypto has really taken that to the next level to some extent with sort of the meme coin activity that you saw in the latter half of last year and even early into this year. Real quickly, before I let you go, one of the things that I thought might be kind of interesting is to get your take on some of the more surprising or counterintuitive things that you've learned about decentralized finance within your capacity at Blockstreet.
So can you kind of give some more color as that?
Yeah, I think as far as what you are doing is you're in a position where it's like you're trying to leverage decentralized finance in some ways as a way to sort of grow the presence of USD1. And I imagine that, like, as you sort of enter that space where you have to sort of toe the line between foundations and decentralized organizations, and you've got different companies, like, is there anything that you has been like counterintuitive in terms of DeFi to you or surprising?
I'd say not necessarily. I mean, like DeFi, the counterintuitive nature to it is, I mean, one, ease of use. One, it's global. I think that's like one of the interesting things is that unlike the traditional markets where they operate in more of a secularized fashion, the second that you launch any sort of decentralized finance, you're immediately dealing with a global market, and you have to operate accordingly. And when you start to bridge, I think to me, I think one of the interesting things is that when you're having conversations with people who are in traditional finance and really just explaining to them kind of the methodology and how people in decentralized finance operate. We're not as dystopian as you think. I think that's one of the more interesting things is that as these TradFi guys start to understand our space, we're not as swayed by the instant greed that I think I think a lot of those things are starting to become debunked. Is that when you're talking to these different foundations and you want to marry them with public companies and you tell them, well, hey, you're immediately going to have this ability to hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity to do whatever you want. If you want to buy yourself a yacht, and these blockchain guys are largely unswayed by that. Obviously, I'm sure to a degree, there's some people who, like this instant liquidity to be able to cash out without having to sell their tokens. But I think more so is that what the traditional guys are learning is that like we're about growth, we're about culture, we're about community. There's a lot of things that society kind of gets away from, in terms of being very, how do I want to say it? It's like there's no sense of community. You don't see much sense of community anymore outside, just because of social media. It's largely fake, and even different platforms, botted comments and things. But when you start getting into crypto, like you realize that people rally around these certain protocols and communities and things. Like that's why I say like USD1 is so beautiful, because when was the last time that people actually rallied around a currency? You haven't really seen it, but you do see it with USD1, is that people believe in what it stands for. They believe in where it's going. And Blockstreet is really just, trying to be a catalyst within that. Is, we believe in what those guys believe in, and, we're able to rally people around a cause. You know, if you're somebody who wants to build within the USD1 ecosystem, we can help facilitate that and give you exposure and just be a net positive. And, you know, I think the world needs more of that. And I think that's one of the more interesting things when you talk about DeFi is that, sure, it's cutthroat, but I think it stands for much more than what you see outside of here.
Kyle, I really appreciate you taking time into your day in order to sit down with us and talk a little USD1. Anything else that you felt like you wanted to add to this conversation that's important?
WFI is launching next week. I'm really excited to see, you know, what those guys have in store for the ecosystem. I know we here at Blockstreet, you know, like this is only the beginning, and you know, we can't wait to be a positive force in the growth of that. We can't wait to see USD1, you know, continue to be the fastest growing stablecoin of all time. You know, we're just, you know, very happy and fortunate to be able to provide value where we can.
Well, thanks, Kyle. Everybody, you can check out Decrypt for all your cryptocurrency news. I'm Andre Bagansky. This was Blockstreet co-founder Kyle Klemmer. Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.